The lawyer's office sat on the second floor of a brick building on Main Street, above a bookstore that had been closed since October. The stairs creaked. The handrail wobbled on the third step from the top. Margot Wexler put her hand on the wall to steady herself and kept climbing. She took the middle chair. Her brother Garrett sat on her left, scrolling through his phone. Her sister Meredith sat on her right, her purse balanced on her knees, her thumb tapping the strap in a slow, steady rhythm. The carpet smelled of dust and old paper. The light through the window had that flat, gray quality of November in North Carolina, the kind of light that makes a room feel colder than it actually is. Attorney Harlow opened a manila folder. He had been their father's lawyer for 16 years, and he had known Hollis Wexler the way men know each other in small towns, through hardware store counters, through hospital waiting rooms, through funerals for mutual friends. He cleared his throat once. He set his reading glasses on his nose. He looked at each of them in turn before he began to read. Hollis was very deliberate about this will, Harlow said, more deliberate than most clients I work with. Garrett put his phone face down on his knee. Harlow read the house first, 4 bedrooms, the yard that Marjorie Wexler had tended for 36 years, the driveway where Hollis had parked the same Ford pickup since 2004, all of it to Garrett. Garrett nodded once. That makes sense, he said. I'm the oldest. No one asked if it made sense to anyone else. Harlow read the savings next. $41,000 in a joint account, a 2017 Buick sedan with 60,000 miles on it, all of it to Meredith. Meredith uncrossed her legs. Okay, she said. Then Harlow paused. He looked at Margot over the top of his glasses. His expression shifted just slightly, a hesitation she could not quite read. To my daughter Margot, he read, I leave the detached garage located at 14 Linden Lane, appraised value $10. The room went very quiet. Margot heard the radiator click in the corner. She heard the faint sound of a truck passing on the street below. She heard her own breath go out of her slow and steady, the way she had been trained to breathe through emergencies in the back of an ambulance. 5 years of her life, and they had appraised it at $10. Garrett leaned forward. That's it, he said. That's what your father wrote, Harlow said. Margot looked at the document in the lawyer's hands, her father's signature at the bottom, shaky but deliberate. The pen had pressed hard into the paper. She could see the small ridge where the ink had dried. He had written this 8 months before he died, when his hands still worked, when he still knew exactly what he was doing. Well, Meredith said. She adjusted her purse strap. I'm sure Dad had his reasons. Garrett stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He had been buttoning his jacket like that since he was 22 years old, since the day he had walked across a stage in Charlottesville to receive his law degree. It was the gesture of a man who had practiced delivering bad news to other people in rooms exactly like this one. It's what he wanted, Margot, Garrett said. You know Dad. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. The garage is just the garage. She did not stand up. She stayed in her chair, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight against the worn upholstery, and she watched her brother and her sister walk out of the room together. She heard their footsteps in the hallway. She heard their voices low and quick, already talking about flights, about Ubers, about how long the drive back to the airport would be. The door clicked shut behind them. Harlow took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He waited until the footsteps faded down the staircase before he spoke. Miss Wexler. She looked up. Your father sat in this exact chair when he wrote that will, Harlow said. He spent 2 hours on it. Most of my clients finish in 20 minutes. She did not know what to say. He chose his next words the way her father had once chosen pieces of wood, slowly, with care, turning each one over in his hands before committing. Each child receives what they need, Harlow said. That is how your father put it to me. She looked at him. I don't know what that means, she said. No, he said, not yet. He folded his hands on the desk. But your father was not a careless man, Margot. He never was. Whatever this looks like from the outside, I would ask you to remember that. She nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. She stood up. Her knees were not quite steady. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. She walked out of the office, down the creaking stairs, past the bookstore with its dark windows and its peeling sign, and out into the gray light of the afternoon. Garrett's rental car was already gone. Meredith was standing by her own car at the curb, sunglasses on, keys in her hand. The wind moved the collar of her coat. She looked up as Margot came down the steps. Margot stopped on the sidewalk. I know this isn't what you expected. Meredith pushed her sunglasses up onto her head. Her eyes were tired in a way that did not match her makeup. But Dad wasn't himself those last few years. The confusion, the forgetting, he probably just forgot to update things. He wrote it 8 months ago. Still, he was himself. Margot zipped her coat to the chin. The wind was sharper now. There were leaves rolling along the gutter, dry and brittle, the color of old pennies. He just wasn't who you wanted him to be. Meredith opened her mouth. She closed it. She put her sunglasses back on. She got in her car and pulled the door shut. The engine started. The taillights flared red, and then she was gone down Main Street, around the corner by the old bank, out of sight. Margot stood on the sidewalk until the sound of the engine faded. A pickup truck rolled past. The driver lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel in the way that men in small southern towns greet anyone they pass, whether they know them or not. She lifted her hand back. She did not know him. She had not known most of the people at the funeral either. She had moved home 5 years ago. She had been 33 years old. She had been working night shifts in the emergency room at a county hospital in Asheville, 2 hours west, up in the mountains. She had a 1-bedroom apartment with a window that looked out on a parking lot and a sycamore tree. She had a cat named Posy that she had adopted from a patient's family the year before. She had a man named Theo who came over on Tuesday nights and stayed for breakfast on Wednesday mornings. She had a life, not a big life, but it was hers. She gave it up in 3 days. She remembered the neurologist's office. She remembered the way the man had spoken without looking up from his chart, his pen already moving toward the next patient's file, his voice as flat and bored as if he were reading the weather. Alzheimer's, early progression, recommend home support, then assisted living within 2 to 3 years. Her mother had been sitting in the exam chair, smiling at a poster on the wall about cholesterol. She had not understood a word. Margot had walked out of that office and called her brother first. Garrett had been in a deposition. His assistant had taken a message. He had called back 4 hours later from a parking garage in downtown Chicago, his voice already half distracted by the next thing on his calendar. That's tough, Margot. We should look into assisted living facilities. There's a place outside of Charlotte my colleague recommends. I can send you the link. She doesn't need a link, Garrett. She needs someone with her. I've got a case going to trial in 6 weeks. You know how it is. She had known exactly how it was. She had called Meredith next from the parking lot of the hospital. Meredith had been in a meeting. She had called back from the airport in Phoenix the next morning, her flight to a sales conference already boarding. Margot, I'll fly out next month, I promise. Send me what the doctor said. I'll send some money for whatever you need. It isn't money, Meredith. It's time. I know, I'm just slammed right now. She had hung up. She had stood in the parking lot and watched a cardinal land on the hood of her car and look at her with its bright black eye for a long, quiet moment before flying away. 3 days later, she packed 2 bags. She gave the cat to the neighbor who already fed him half the time. She subletted the apartment to a young nurse who had just transferred down from Pennsylvania. She told Theo she would call him when she got settled. He had stood in her doorway with both hands in the pockets of his canvas jacket, and he had looked at her with such tenderness that her chest had ached. "How long?" he had asked. "I don't know." He had nodded. He had kissed her forehead. He had walked down the stairs to his truck. She had driven home in the rain, 4 hours east down out of the mountains into the long, flat country where the trees were already beginning to turn. She had pulled into her parents' driveway just before sunset. Her mother had been standing in the kitchen wearing a winter coat in July, trying to microwave a can of soup without opening it. Her father had been sitting at the table staring at the can. His eyes were red. "Margot," he had said, "your mother, she is—" "I know, Dad. I know. I'm here." The first year was manageable. Marjorie Wexler still knew everyone's names. She forgot dates. She mixed up holidays. She put the milk in the cupboard once and the coffee in the refrigerator twice. She left the stove on. Margot installed a sensor that shut the burners off after 20 minutes of inactivity. She rewrote the labels on every medication bottle in capital letters. She drove her mother to every appointment, every test, every consultation. She found a day shift at the county hospital, 20 minutes from the house. She came home each evening and cooked dinner and did the laundry and sat with her mother on the back porch while her father drove out to the hardware store on the edge of town where he had worked since before Margot was born. Brennan's Hardware, run by a man named Otis Brennan, 68 years old, who had been her father's friend for 30 years. Hollis went there every morning at 7. He came home every evening at 6. He had been doing it for so long that the rhythm of his life had pressed itself into the wood of their kitchen floor, into the worn arm of the recliner where he sat to take off his boots, into the very air of the house. The second year got harder. Marjorie stopped recognizing the neighbors. She called Margot by her aunt's name, a woman who had been dead for a decade. She wandered. One night in October, Margot woke at 3 in the morning to find the front door standing open and her mother nowhere in the house. She found her standing barefoot in the driveway. Her mother was looking up at the sky. "The stars are loud tonight," Marjorie had said. Margot had wrapped her in a blanket. She had walked her back inside. She had sat on the floor next to her parents' bed for an hour, listening to her mother breathe, watching her father sleep with his hand resting on the empty pillow beside him as if he had not yet noticed his wife was gone. The next day she installed new locks, then alarms on the doors, then a sensor that beeped softly in her own bedroom whenever the front door opened. She started sleeping with one ear open. The third year, Marjorie stopped recognizing Margot altogether. "Who are you?" her mother asked one morning, pulling her arm away during a bath. "I'm Margot, Mom. I'm your daughter." "I don't have a daughter named Margot. I'm the one who's going to help you today." That was the line that worked most days. Margot learned not to argue. She learned not to remind. She learned not to grieve in front of her mother because grief, frightened Marjorie now made her hands flutter at her chest like trapped birds. She learned to be a stranger who was kind. Garrett called once a month. The conversations never varied. "How's Mom doing?" "She doesn't know who I am, Garrett." A long pause. "That's tough, Margot. I wish I could be there more." "Then come. I've got a case going to trial. It was always a case going to trial. There was always a case going to trial. Garrett's life ran on cases going to trial, the way other lives ran on weather or seasons or the rising and setting of the sun. Meredith sent money twice in 5 years, 2 checks for $500 each inside greeting cards with printed messages, no handwritten notes. Margot used the money for adult diapers and the medication that cost more than her car payment. She filed the cards in a drawer in the kitchen. She did not throw them away. She did not know why. In April of the 3rd year Theo came. She had not asked him to come. He had driven down from Asheville on a Saturday afternoon. He had parked in the driveway. He had knocked on the door. She had opened it in sweatpants with her hair pulled back, smelling of the breakfast oatmeal she had been spoon-feeding her mother that morning, and his face had not changed when he saw her. He had only smiled, the same quiet smile he had always given her. She had walked out to his truck with him. They had stood there in the gravel for 20 minutes. She remembered very little of what they said. She remembered only that his eyes had been wet at the end, and that there had been a small box in the pocket of his canvas jacket that she had pretended not to see, and that he had asked her one question: "How long are you going to do this?" And she had answered, "As long as it takes." He had nodded. He had touched her cheek with the back of his hand. He had gotten into his truck. He had driven away. She had walked back inside, and she had not mentioned him to anyone, not then, not after. She had folded that part of her life and put it in a drawer the way she had filed Meredith's greeting cards. She had not opened the drawer again. The 4th year her mother stopped speaking in sentences. The 5th year she stopped eating without help. Marjorie Wexler died on a Tuesday in March, quietly, in her own bed, with Margot sitting beside her and Hollis holding her hand. The hospice nurse said it was peaceful. Margot nodded and did not say anything because she did not know what that word was supposed to mean when it described the end of someone's mind going dark, a piece at a time for 4 straight years. She and her father sat in the bedroom for a long time afterward. The window was open a crack. There was a maple tree in the side yard that had just begun to bud. Hollis had planted that tree in 1987, the year Margot was born. He had told her once that he had picked it because maples were patient. They took their time. They did not bloom quickly. They lived long. "She knew you," he said finally. He was looking at his wife's face. At the end, "She knew you." "No, Dad." "Yes." He turned his head and looked at his daughter. She didn't have the words, but she knew. I could see it. The day before yesterday, the way she looked at you when you came in with the water. She knew. She had not believed him then. She believed him now. He died 4 months later. It was July. A stroke, sudden and complete. Margot had been at work finishing a 12-hour shift in the emergency room when her phone began to buzz on the counter at the nurse's station. She had not recognized the number. She had answered out of habit, the way she answered every number while she was working. It was Otis Brennan. "Margot," he said. His voice was very calm. "Your daddy collapsed at the garage on Linden Lane. The paramedics are with him. I'm headed there now." She had run out of the hospital in her scrubs, without her coat, without her keys, and she had ridden in the back of an ambulance with her father's hand in her own, and she had felt the moment his fingers stopped responding. She had ridden the rest of the way anyway. She had held his hand the whole time. His fingers were rough and thick with calluses, the hands of a man who had worked with them his entire life. At the hospital, a doctor she knew from the emergency room had put his palm on her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Margot." "Yeah," she had said. She had stood in the hallway under fluorescent light, and she had been quiet for a long time. Garrett flew in for the funeral. Meredith drove up from Scottsdale. They wore black. They cried in the right places. They stood at the graveside and they said the right things to the right people. They shook hands with neighbors they did not recognize, and they accepted casseroles they would never eat. They left within 48 hours. And then Margot was alone in a house that still smelled like both of her parents, with nothing to show for 5 years of her life except a $10 garage on a dead-end street that she could not bring herself to visit. 2 weeks passed. She told herself she was busy. She told herself it did not matter. A garage on Linden Lane where the pavement cracked and weeds grew through behind the old railroad tracks. What could possibly be in there? Sawdust, old tools, the smell of her father maybe still hanging in the air. She was not sure she could bear that. She sat in her parents' house in the evenings. She did not turn on many lights. She ate cereal for dinner standing at the kitchen counter. She slept in her old bedroom under a quilt her mother had stitched. In 1992, the year Margot turned 5, she walked through the rooms of the house in the mornings before her shifts at the hospital. She touched the back of her father's recliner. She opened the refrigerator and stared at the small bottle of horseradish that he had bought and would never finish. She found his reading glasses on the nightstand, and she folded them and she set them in the drawer, and then she took them back out again and put them where she had found them. She could not yet decide which of his things she was allowed to move. On the 14th day, she decided to clean out her mother's room. She did not know why that day. There was no particular reason. The morning had been gray and damp and quiet, and she had stood in the doorway of her mother's bedroom with a cup of coffee in her hand, and something inside her had said today. She started with the closet, her mother's dresses, her mother's shoes, her mother's old church coat with the velvet collar. She folded each item slowly. She breathed each one in. She put the things she could not give away into a box at the foot of the bed, and the things she could into bags for the thrift store on Elm Street that had been there since Margot was a child. She moved to the dresser. The top of the dresser was bare except for one object, a wooden box, hand-carved, 6 inches by 8. The lid had a small inlay on it, a leaf pattern in pale wood against the dark cherry of the lid. Her mother had kept that box on her dresser for as long as Margot could remember. She had never opened it. It had always seemed to her when she was small that the box was private, that whatever was inside belonged to her mother alone, and that asking would have been like asking to read her mother's letters. She sat on the edge of the bed. She set her coffee on the nightstand. She picked up the box. The wood was warm. The grain ran in clean parallel lines under her thumb. The hinges were brass dulled by years of handling. She turned the box over in her hands. There was no marking on the bottom. There was no name. There was only a small symbol carved into the wood near the base, so small she had not noticed it before. 2 letters intertwined. H.M. Hollis, Marjorie. She opened the box. Inside, on a small square of dark felt, was a single piece of paper, folded twice. Her mother's handwriting on the outside in pencil, faint and careful. The way Marjorie had written before, the disease had taken the letters out of her hands. Margot. Margot opened it. The paper was thin. The handwriting was steady, but the lines were slightly uneven, as if her mother had written it sitting at the kitchen table early in the morning, before the day's confusion had started in those clear hours she sometimes still had in the first year. The note read, "Margot, my love, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and your father is gone too. He told me once that this would be the order. He said he could not be in this world without me. He was right, I think. He was right about so many things. When I am gone, when he is gone, when you find this box, I need you to go to the garage with him, not alone. With him, Let him show you. I have always known what he does there. I have known since before you were born. It is the most beautiful thing he has ever made, Margot, and the most beautiful thing in our marriage, and it has all been for you. Please go to the garage. He has been waiting for 40 years. Your mother, Marjorie. Margot sat on the edge of the bed. She read the note again, then a third time, then a fourth. The light through the window had shifted. The maple tree in the side yard was moving in a small wind. Somewhere down the block a dog was barking. A car horn sounded once and was silent. Her mother had known. For 40 years, her mother had carried this secret inside her marriage like a small flame, sheltered and steady, and she had never told anyone, not Garrett, not Meredith, not Margot herself. And the note had said with him, but Hollis was gone. Hollis was in the ground next to Marjorie, now 4 months gone, and there was no with him left to do. There was only her. She read the note one more time. She folded it. She put it back in the box. She closed the lid. She held the box against her chest for a long minute. Then she picked up her keys. She drove to Linden Lane. The road ran down past the railroad tracks, past the old grain elevator that had not been used since 1996, past the lot where the lumber mill had stood until the fire of 2003. The pavement was patched in long, uneven seams. The houses along the way were small. Some had vinyl siding. Some had peeling paint. One had a child's plastic tricycle abandoned in the front yard. The colors faded to almost nothing by the sun. The garage was at the end of the street. It was set back from the road on a narrow lot between an empty parcel grown over with kudzu and an old metal shed that had once belonged to a man named Cleo who had repaired lawn mowers. Cleo had died in 2011. The shed had been empty ever since. Margot pulled into the gravel patch in front of the garage. She turned off the engine. She sat in the car for a long time. She remembered being 5 years old. She remembered sitting in the cab of her father's old pickup truck, a juice box in her hand, a coloring book on her lap. She remembered the way the sun had come through the windshield and warmed her knees. She remembered her father walking across the gravel toward the garage door, his work boots leaving prints in the dust, his keys jingling in his hand. She remembered the smell of him when he came back, sawdust, linseed oil, something sharp and clean and good. He would smile at her in the cab, and he would say, "All right, Bug, let's get you some ice cream." She had asked him once, "What do you do in there, Dad?" He had looked at her with his hands on the steering wheel, his face soft, in the way that fathers' faces are soft when they are talking to their daughters, and they think no one else is watching. Just tinkering Bug. A man needs a place to think. She had never asked again. Children accept the rhythms of their parents' lives. They do not question. They take the world they are given, and they fold themselves into it the way water folds itself into the shape of a bowl. It is only later, much later, when the parents are gone, and there is no one left to ask, that a person begins to realize how much they never knew. She got out of the car. The wind was cold. The gravel crunched under her shoes. She walked across the lot to the garage door. It was a metal rolling door, rusted along the bottom edge with a padlock at the latch. Gray cinder block walls, flat roof, a single high window on the side almost too high to see, set above eye level, so that nothing from the street could be observed of what happened inside. She took the key out of her pocket. The lawyer had given it to her in a small envelope after the will was read. She had carried it with her every day for 2 weeks without using it. She fit the key into the padlock. It turned smoothly. Someone had oiled it. Recently, within the last few months. She pulled the door up. The metal rattled and rolled on its tracks. The cold light of late morning poured into the interior, and the smell hit her before anything else. Sawdust, linseed oil, 40 years of it, layered into the cinder block, pressed into the wood of the workbench, carried on every breath of every man who had ever stepped inside. Her father's smell. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes adjust. The workbench ran the entire length of the left wall, 8 feet of solid wood so heavy and so deep that it could have held the engine of a car. Above the bench, a pegboard, hand tools arranged in careful rows, each one hung inside an outline traced in black marker so that any tool removed would leave its shape on the wall. Nothing was missing, nothing was out of place. She walked to the bench. She ran her hand across the surface. The wood was smooth, worn down by decades of use. There were marks in the grain, faint impressions left by the shapes of whatever he had built in here. Lumber was stacked along the back wall, boards of different widths, some wrapped in clear plastic, organized by type, the way a man with patience organizes his materials when he is going to come back to them. She had always assumed this was the whole of it. A workbench, a pegboard, some boards. Her father on Saturday mornings doing what a quiet man does in a quiet space because his wife was talking to her sister on the phone and he needed a place to be alone with his own hands, just tinkering. A man needs a place to think. She walked the length of the back wall. She ran her hand along the lumber stack. The boards were dust-free, recently arranged, and then she saw it. Behind the lumber where the cinder block wall should have been flat and continuous and gray, there was a line, a vertical line. It ran from the floor to the ceiling, so thin she almost missed it, painted over in the same gray as the rest of the wall. She pulled 2 of the boards aside. She leaned closer. A door. No handle, no knob, only a small brass keyhole set flush with the surface of the wood so cleanly mounted that the seam was almost invisible. Her hands were trembling. She turned back to the workbench. She opened the drawers one at a time. Nails, sandpaper, a roll of canvas, a small metal level, pencils worn down to stubs. In the back of the center drawer, she felt something taped to the underside of the wood. She pulled it free. A key, small, brass, the teeth worn smooth from years of use. She walked back to the door. She stood in front of it for a long moment. Outside on Linden Lane, a truck passed and was gone. The wind moved a piece of paper across the gravel. Somewhere far off, a train sounded its horn, low and slow, the same horn that had sounded over this town every afternoon at 12:15 for as long as Margot Wexler had been alive. She put the key into the lock. She turned it. The door swung inward with a soft rush of cool air. The air carried the same sawdust smell, but deeper, richer. 40 years of it layered into the walls of a room she had never known existed behind a door her father had built with his own hands and never spoken of to anyone except her mother, the woman who had carried his secret for an entire marriage and had left a note for the daughter she had loved most. Margot stepped through. The room was twice the size of the workshop. He had built it into the space behind the garage, extending into what Margot had always thought was an empty lot. A high window she had never noticed from outside let in a long column of pale morning light, and in that light, standing quiet and still in the cold air, was furniture. A dining table with hand-carved legs, 6 chairs around it, each one slightly different, each one perfect in its own way. A bookshelf tall enough to reach the ceiling with panels so smooth they seemed to drink the light. a bed frame with a headboard made from a single piece of dark walnut, the grain running across the wood like a slow river, a rocking chair with armrests worn to a soft shine as if 100 patient hands had already rested there, a writing desk with dovetailed drawers, the joints so tight they were almost invisible. Every piece had a small paper tag hanging from a length of cotton string. She did not move for a long minute. She did not breathe. Then she walked to the dining table. Her hand was shaking when she turned over the first tag, her father's handwriting, in pencil, steady and sure, for Margot. She touched the next tag, the rocking chair, for Margot, the bookshelf, for Margot, the bed frame, the writing desk, the blanket chest at the foot of the bed, for Margot, for Margot, for Margot. Every single piece. She lowered herself slowly to the floor. She leaned her back against the dining table leg. The wood was smooth and cool against her spine. Around her in the cold morning light stood 40 years of work she had never known existed, and every piece of it had her name on it. She sat there for a long time. The light through the high window moved across the floor as the morning turned toward noon. She watched the dust drift in the beam, fine and slow, rising and falling, in currents she could not feel. There was no sound in the room except her own breathing. The town outside seemed to have stopped existing. The cars on Linden Lane did not pass. The train at 12:15 did not blow its horn. The wind did not move. There was only this. Eventually she stood up. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She walked to the dining table and laid both palms flat on the surface. The wood was dark cherry. The grain was tight and clean. The joints were so finely fitted that she could not see where one board met the next. She pressed her hand against the surface and the wood was warm, beneath her skin smooth, in the way that only came from years of finishing the kind of finish that no machine could reproduce, the kind that came only from a man's hand, moving across the same surface, again and again across days and weeks and months, until the wood remembered him. The chairs were next, 6 of them, each a slightly different design, but all clearly made by the same hands. She pulled one out and sat in it. The height was right, the angle of the backrest, the width of the seat. It fit her perfectly, and she could not explain how her father had gotten it so right without ever measuring her, how he could have known the shape of her body, the length of her thighs, the way her shoulders sat when she relaxed into a chair. She got up. She walked to the bookshelf. It reached the ceiling. The shelves were different heights, some deep enough for oversized books, others narrow. She ran her hand along the edge. The wood was sanded so fine it felt like polished stone. The bed frame had a headboard of solid walnut, wide and heavy, carved from a single piece. The figure of the grain was so unusual that she stood there for a full minute, trying to understand how a tree had grown that way. He must have searched for years for that piece of wood. He must have driven hours to find it. The rocking chair moved when she touched it. No creak, no wobble, just a slow, steady glide. And then she came to the writing desk. It was smaller than the other pieces, but more carefully made. Dovetail drawers, a tilted writing surface that locked in 2 positions, small brass pulls that matched the key she had used on the hidden door. She pulled open the top drawer. A leather-bound journal lay flat inside. She lifted it out. The cover was worn soft from handling. The spine was cracked from decades of use. She turned to the first page, her father's handwriting. Careful, steady. H.W. Sterling, Furniture Journal, Volume 1. She turned the page. The first entry was dated 38 years ago, a sketch of a simple side table with dimensions in the margins, notes on the wood, Red oak from the lot behind the church on Vernon Road. Good straight grain, will season through winter. She kept turning. The entries spanned decades. Some pages were packed with dense notes, the handwriting working its way around the edges of the paper. Other pages had nothing but a single pencil sketch so precise it could have been printed. Each entry documented a piece her father had designed, built and sold. Dressers, dining sets, cabinets, bed frames, writing desks, bedside tables. The drawings were measured down to the 16th of an inch. There were notes on joinery methods, on wood sources, on how different finishes behaved across the seasons. And at the bottom of most pages, a name and a dollar figure. Sold to Pierce, $8,000. Sold to Pierce, $12,000. Sold to Pierce, $12,000. The name came up again and again. Pierce, a dealer from what she could tell. Some man somewhere who had handled the selling. Hollis Wexler, the man who had gone to work at a hardware store every morning for 30 years, who had never asked for a raise, who had never missed a shift, the man whose entire wardrobe consisted of 4 pairs of work pants and 7 flannel shirts and 1 good suit he had worn to weddings and funerals for as long as Margot could remember. That man had been building museum-quality furniture under a name nobody in his family had ever heard. She knew the letters, his first and middle initials, Hollis Walter, but Sterling, that was the part she did not recognize. That was not their name. She flipped back to the inside of the front cover. In smaller writing at the bottom, almost hidden by the crease of the binding in her father's careful hand, H.W. equals Hollis Walter. Sterling equals Marjorie's maiden name. He had named his secret life after himself and his wife. Margot closed the journal. She set it on the desk. Her hands were steadier now. The shock had settled into something else, a quiet pressure behind her eyes that she did not try to name. Beneath where the journal had rested, in the same drawer, was a small leather bank book. She opened it. The last entry, updated 7 months before her father died, showed a balance of $341,241. The account was listed under 2 names, Hollis W. Wexler and Margot E. Wexler. She read the number again. She turned back through the pages. She watched the deposits build over the decades. 2,000, 5,000, 8,000, 12,000. Each one lined up with a sale in the journal stretching back across the years like quiet, steady footprints across a long beach. Hollis Wexler had earned over $300,000 in this hidden room, and at some point, without ever telling her, he had walked into a bank and put her name on the account. She sat down at the writing desk. She pressed both palms flat against the writing surface. The wood was cool and precise under her hands. Every edge was clean, every joint exact. Her father had been building her a home, one piece at a time, for 40 years. The dining table she would eat at, the bookshelf she would fill, the bed she would sleep in, the chair she would rock in when she was old. He had built all of it piece by piece in this hidden room behind a door no one knew existed, and he had hidden the money to pay for the house that would hold them, and he had done it so quietly that the people closest to him had never suspected a single thing. She picked up her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a number she had not called in months. Otis Brennan answered on the second ring. Margot. His voice was steady, unsurprised. I was wondering when you'd call. She closed her eyes. You knew. It was not a question. There was a pause on the other end. I have known for a long time, Margot. How long? 30 years, maybe longer. Another pause. Are you at the garage? Yes. I will be there in 10 minutes. He showed up in 8. Otis Brennan was 68 years old. He had run the hardware store on the edge of town since his own father had retired in 1986. He had given Hollis Wexler a job behind the counter before Margot had been born. He drove an old white pickup with a topper on the back and a coffee thermos that he refilled at the same gas station every morning for as long as anyone could remember. He came through the garage door carrying a canvas tote bag. He stopped when he saw the hidden room standing open. He stood there for a moment with the bag in his hand and the cold morning light on his face. "So you found it," he said. "You could have told me, Otis. Your father made me promise." He set the bag on the workbench. He looked at the open doorway. 30 years, Margot. I was not going to break my word the week he died." She did not answer. She led him into the room. Otis walked through it slowly. He touched the things he passed. He ran his hand along the dining table. He pressed his thumb against the edge of one of the chairs. His eyes were wet, but his voice stayed even. He was a man who had grown up in a generation that did not let men weep where other men could see. He sat down in one of the dining chairs. It held him easily. "Your daddy started building furniture in his 20s, Otis said. Small pieces, side tables, cutting boards, things he gave away. He looked at the floor. He was not trained. He learned from library books and by making mistakes and fixing them. He spent 4 years on his first dovetail before he got one he was willing to keep. 4 years, Margot, on one joint." He looked up at her. But he had something most people do not have. He had patience, real patience, the kind where you are willing to spend 3 weeks on a single joint because you know it matters. Otis ran his hand along the arm of the chair he was sitting in, and he got good, better than good. By the time he was 35, he was building at a level that most professionals never reach. I watched it happen. He would stay late at the store 3 nights a week, and I used to think he was just avoiding going home the way some married men do. But he was not avoiding. He was coming here 3 nights a week, sometimes 4. Your mother knew. She always knew. She made him sandwiches on Tuesday nights, and she put them in his lunch pail with a little note on top. He still has every one of those notes. They are in a tin in the back of the bottom drawer of that desk. Margot looked at the desk. She did not open the drawer yet. "He wanted to keep it separate," Otis said. "His life at the store, his life at home, and this." He gestured at the room. He found a dealer in Raleigh, quiet man, name of Ellsworth Pierce, handles galleries and private sales, real high-end work. Your father would build a piece, drive it to Raleigh in the back of his pickup once every few months and hand it over. Ellsworth did the rest. Exhibitions, collectors, shipping. Your father never met a single buyer. And no one figured out who H.W. Sterling was. That was the whole point. Otis reached into his canvas bag. He pulled out a catalog, glossy cover, heavy paper, the kind of publication that sits on the tables of galleries in cities Margot had only seen in movies. He handed it across to her. The cover read, H.W. Sterling, 40 Years of American Craft. Margot opened it. Photographs of furniture she recognized, the dining table she was standing next to, a desk nearly identical to the one in the corner, a rocking chair with the same curved armrests. Each piece was shot in a gallery setting with careful lighting and a card listing dimensions and estimated value. $15,000, $22,000, $38,000. He was famous, Margot said. Her voice cracked on the word. In certain circles, Otis said, collectors, woodworking journals, gallery owners, H.W. Sterling is a recognized name. People write about his work. There is a craftsman up in Vermont who has been trying to apprentice with him for the last 6 years. He sends letters every Christmas. He paused, but nobody knew the man behind it. That was what your father wanted. Why? She set the catalog on the writing desk. Why hide something this big for his entire life? Otis leaned forward. He rested his elbows on his knees. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words the way her father used to choose a piece of wood, turning it over, checking the grain. Your father saw things, Margot. He saw everything. He saw how Garrett treated money. He saw how Meredith handled obligation. He saw what you gave up when you moved home. He watched you bathe your mother and hold her hand and never once complain about what it cost you. Otis looked up. And about 10 years ago, he sat me down after closing one Friday night and he told me he was worried. Worried about what? He said he had been putting money aside for years, good money, and he was afraid that if Garrett or Meredith ever found out about it, they would come after it. Legal action, family pressure, guilt. He had seen it happen to other people's families. Inheritance fights that tore everything apart, ended in court, ended in silence between brothers and sisters for the rest of their lives. Otis shook his head. So he kept it all here, the furniture, the account, the journal, behind a door nobody knew about, in a garage nobody wanted. The $10 appraisal. Your father arranged that himself, called the county appraiser and asked for the minimum tax value on the structure, 4 walls and a roof. The man gave him $10 and your daddy said that was perfect. Otis almost smiled. He was the smartest man I ever knew, Margot. People just did not see it because he was quiet about it. She turned the catalog to a page near the back, a rocking chair in dark cherry, armrests worn smooth from handling. The caption, Sterling Rocking Chair number 7, Cherry and Walnut. Estimated value $26,000. She looked across the room at the rocking chair tagged for Margot. He kept the best ones, Otis said. He followed her gaze. Everything in this room was a piece he refused to sell. Ellsworth asked about them over the years. Offered good money. Your daddy said no every time. They were for you, always. Margot closed the catalog. She sat on the edge of the blanket chest. She looked around the room, at the furniture her father had spent a lifetime building, at the journal full of his sketches and notes, at the bank book on the desk with her name on it. Hollis Wexler had built his daughter an inheritance so complete that the only way to protect it was to make everyone else believe it was worthless. He had wrapped it in a $10 appraisal, in a dead-end street, in a rusted garage door behind kudzu and an old shed, and he had waited for the one child who would actually walk inside and look. Otis stood up from the chair. There is something else, he said. She looked at him. About 2 years before he died, your father came to the store on a Sunday afternoon. That was unusual. Hollis did not come to the store on Sundays. He handed me a sealed envelope and he told me to keep it at the store, in the safe. He said I should not open it and I should not give it to you until you had found this room. What is in it? I do not know. He asked me not to look, and I did not. Margot nodded slowly. Not yet, she said. I need to sit with this first. Take your time. There is no rush now. Otis put his hand on her shoulder, gently, the way a father might, the way her father had 100 times, 1,000 times before he had been gone. He would be proud of you, Margot, but he would also tell you to stop sitting on the floor and to use the furniture. He did not build it for decoration. That sounded exactly like her father. Otis walked back through the workshop. She heard his pickup start up outside. The engine settled into its old familiar rumble. The gravel crunched under his tires. The sound faded down Linden Lane, and then the garage was quiet. She spent another hour in the room alone. She read more of the journal. Slowly, page by page, she read sketches of pieces she would never see because they had been sold to strangers who would never know that the man who built them had gone home each night to a 4-bedroom house and had not said a single word about what he had made. She opened drawers and found sandpaper graded by hand into envelopes marked 121, 82, 23, 20. She found wood samples cut into small rectangles, each one labeled in pencil with the species and the year it was milled. She found pencils worn down to stubs. She found a tin of brass screws sorted by length. She found a small frame photograph of her mother that she had never seen before, taken when Marjorie was perhaps 30, standing in front of a maple tree, in summer, her hair down her face younger than Margot had ever known it, smiling at the man who was holding the camera. She found the tin Otis had mentioned. In the back of the bottom drawer of the desk, a small flat tin that had once held cough drops, now packed full of folded squares of paper. She lifted one out, her mother's handwriting. "Have a good night. I will leave the porch light on." Another, "There is leftover chicken in the fridge if you are hungry when you get back." Another, "The boys at the store told me you took on the new lumber order today. I am proud of you." Another, "Margot brought a new boy home for dinner last week, and I wanted to tell you he is gentle with her. I think he will be careful." There were dozens of them, notes from a lifetime of Tuesday nights. She put them back in the tin. She closed the lid. She set it on the desk next to the journal. She touched surfaces her father had shaped and smoothed and perfected over the course of a life. She did not cry. The tears would come later, for now there was only this quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when you have been told a truth so large that your mind has not yet caught up to it. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. "Garrett." She answered. "Margot." His voice was light, almost breezy, the kind of voice he used when he was billing $400 an hour for a phone call he wanted to keep short. "Quick question. I was going through some of Dad's old paperwork last night. Found a few references to that garage on Linden Lane." A pause that lasted one beat too long. "So what was in there?" She looked at the bank book lying open on the desk, at the journal, at the catalog, at the room full of furniture her father had spent 40 years building for her. "Sawdust," she said, "some old tools, nothing worth the trip." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "Right." His voice had cooled by half a degree. "Well, if you find anything interesting, let us know." He hung up. She set the phone on the desk. She looked around the hidden room. She wondered how long the lie would hold. 3 days later, Garrett called again. "I'm driving down this weekend," he said. "Meredith is flying in too." "Garrett, I told you, there is nothing." "Margot," his voice went flat. The lawyer's voice, the one he used in conference rooms in Chicago. "I have been a lawyer for 25 years. I know when someone is not telling me the whole story." She did not answer. "Saturday morning. We will be there at 10. He hung up before she could say anything else. She spent Friday evening in the rocking chair, in the hidden room. She stared at the ceiling. She tried to decide what to do. She could lock the door, hide the key, tell them there was nothing behind the wall. But Garrett would come back. He would hire an inspector. He would petition the court if he had to. That was how Garrett worked. He did not let go of things. He had never let go of anything in his life. A bone once in his teeth stayed there. And there was another part of it, a part she was not proud of. She wanted him to see it. She wanted Garrett to stand in this room and look at what their father had built in the dark. while his eldest son had been in Chicago billing $400 an hour and not returning his mother's calls. Saturday morning was overcast and cool. She got to the garage at 9:30. She unlocked the front door. She left it open. She waited. Garrett's rental pulled up at 10 o'clock sharp. Meredith was in the passenger seat. They got out without speaking. Garrett was wearing a sport coat and leather shoes. Meredith had her purse over one shoulder and her sunglasses pushed up on her head. "Morning," Garrett said. "Come in," Margot said. She led them through the workshop. Garrett looked at the workbench and the pegboard with a quick assessing sweep, already cataloging, already estimating. Meredith stopped in front of the row of Japanese saws hanging from the pegboard. "Dad spent time in here, more than any of us knew." She walked to the back wall. She opened the hidden door. The room filled with gray morning light from the high window. The furniture stood where it always stood, quiet and clean, tags hanging from cotton strings, the dining table, the chairs, the bookshelf, the rocking chair, the writing desk. Garrett stepped through the doorway and stopped. She watched the calculation begin behind his eyes. She had watched her brother calculate his entire life. He scanned the room, assessing, cataloging, adding numbers. She could almost see the figures running across the inside of his forehead. Meredith came through behind him. She walked straight to the dining table. She touched one of the chairs. Then she noticed the tags. "For Margot," she read aloud. She turned to her sister. "They all say that. Every one." Garrett had already found the desk. He was opening drawers without asking, pulling out the journal, flipping through pages. Then he found the bank book. She watched him read the balance. She counted to 3 in her head before he spoke. 341,000. He looked up. "You are serious. That is what he saved over 40 years. And you were not going to tell us. I told you what I was ready to tell you." Garrett set the bank book on the desk. He straightened up. He buttoned his sport coat, which was something he did before delivering an argument. She had watched him do it at both funerals. "This needs to be discussed," he said. "This amount of money, these assets, they cannot just go unaddressed. The will said you got the garage. It did not say anything about a hidden room full of collector-grade furniture and a savings account bigger than the house. The will said the garage and its contents. That is not what it says. Ask Harlow." "I have already called Harlow." Garrett looked at her. "And," she did not answer that, "this should be split 3 ways. That is the fair thing to do. You got the house, Garrett. Meredith got the savings and the car. This is what Dad left me." Dad was confused at the end. He was not thinking clearly. He spent 40 years building this room. He was thinking clearly. Then why did he not tell us? She looked at her brother. He was standing in the center of a room their father had poured his life into. A room full of work that Hollis had kept hidden for decades to protect it from exactly this conversation. You cannot inherit what you never bothered to see. The room went quiet. Meredith was sitting at the dining table now. The journal was open in front of her. She turned a page slowly. "Garrett, look at this." "I have seen it." "No, look." She pointed at a sketch, a rocking chair, drawn in careful pencil, every joint labeled, every measurement precise. Beneath the drawing in Hollis's handwriting for Margot. When she is tired, when she needs to rest. Garrett glanced at the page and looked away. "That is sentimental, Meredith. It does not change the legal question." "The legal question," Margot said, "is that Dad put my name on the account. Both names, joint account. That makes it ours. I will have my firm review the estate documents." "Then have them review it." Garrett looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze. She had spent 5 years in an emergency room handling people in crisis. She could handle her brother. I am not going to let this go, he said. I know. He walked out of the hidden room, through the workshop, out the garage door. She heard the car door slam. She heard the engine start. Meredith stayed. She was still sitting at the table. The journal was open. One hand was resting flat on the page of her father's sketches. She did not look up. He is not wrong that it is a lot of money, she said quietly. He is not wrong about the number. He is wrong about everything else. Meredith closed the journal. She ran her hand across the surface of the table, slowly. Then she stood up. She walked toward the doorway. She stopped. She turned back. Margot, yes. Her sister was looking at the rocking chair in the corner, the tag swinging from the armrest. For Margot. I have not done well by you, have I? It was not the question Margot had expected. She did not answer. Meredith nodded once as if she had not really needed an answer. She walked out. Margot heard the car door, the engine, the slow grind of gravel under tires. She stood alone in the room. The argument still hung in the air. She could smell Garrett's cologne over the sawdust. She walked to the writing desk and sat down. She opened the top drawer. She reached for the journal. It was gone. Meredith had left it on the dining table. She would go retrieve it in a minute. The bank book was still in the drawer where Garrett had set it down. She picked it up, and then as she lifted it, she noticed something she had missed before. Underneath where the bank book had been pressed against the bottom of the drawer, she saw a thin groove, a line in the wood, barely visible, running along the inside edge of the drawer. She had not seen it the first time. She had not been looking. She had been too overwhelmed to look. She pressed her finger into the groove. She pulled. The bottom panel of the drawer lifted out. Beneath it, flat and neat, built with the same quiet precision as everything else in this room, a false bottom. 4 envelopes lay inside, each one sealed with a careful fold, each one in her father's handwriting. Margot at 10, Margot at 20, Margot at 30, Margot at 40. Her hands went still. She sat there looking at the envelopes for a long time before she picked up the first one. She opened it carefully. She slid her finger under the flap. A single sheet of paper inside, folded twice. Margot, you are 10 years old today and you do not know I am writing this. I was in the parking lot at school yesterday, waiting to pick you up, and I watched you through the fence. You were eating your lunch on the bench by the basketball court. A boy sat down next to you. He did not have a lunch bag. He did not ask you for anything. You looked at him. You looked at your sandwich. You tore it in half. You handed him the bigger piece, and you said sure when he thanked you. You did not look around to see if anyone noticed. You just did it. That is when I knew what kind of person you were going to be. Happy birthday, Bug. Love, Dad. Margot folded the letter. She set it on the desk. She sat for a moment breathing. Then she opened the second. Margot at 20. You told me last month that you are going to be a nurse. Your brother is in law school. Your sister is studying business. They both look better on paper. But you sat at the kitchen table last Sunday and you told me you wanted to take care of people, and your face was so certain about it that I had to leave the room so you would not see me cry. You are going to be good at it, Margot. You are going to be good at it because you already understand the thing most people never figure out. Helping somebody is not something you do to feel good about yourself. It is just something you do. Happy birthday. Love, Dad. She set the second letter beside the first. Her eyes were burning. She wiped her face. She opened the third. Margot at 30. You are 30 today, bug. And I want to tell you about a phone call your mother got last spring. A woman called the house. Her name was Caroline. She said her husband had died in your emergency room in February. She had called the main hospital line to ask the name of the nurse who had stayed with them that night. The receptionist had given her our number by mistake. She apologized. Your mother told her not to apologize. She gave her your name. The woman said she had been driving past the hospital every Wednesday for 2 months. Wednesdays were the night her husband had died, and every Wednesday she had thought about the nurse who had sat with her in that small family room afterward, the one who had not looked at her watch, the one who had not asked her if she had someone to call, the one who had simply stayed for 3 hours until Caroline's brother arrived at 5 in the morning to drive her home. You never told us about that night, Margot. You have never told us about any of those nights, but somebody else did, and now we know you are going to spend your life doing that, sitting in small rooms with people on the worst day of their lives, not looking at your watch. I do not know yet how it will cost you. I do not know yet what you will give up to keep doing it, but I know you will, because that is who you are. That is who you have been since you were 10 years old. Your mother hung up the phone and she sat at the kitchen table and she cried, and I sat across from her, and I did not say anything for a long time. There was nothing to say. We had not raised you to be that. We had only watched you become it. Happy birthday, Margot. We are proud of you in a way we do not have the words for. Love, Dad. She set the third letter beside the first two. Her hands were unsteady now. She opened the last envelope. Margot at 40. You came home. Nobody asked you to. Your brother offered to look into assisted living from his office in Chicago. Your sister sent a check. You packed 2 bags and you drove 4 hours and you walked through the front door and you said, I am here. You were seeing a man named Theo when the diagnosis came. I liked him. He was quiet. He was kind to you. He made you laugh in a way I had not heard since you were small. I found a ring box in the pocket of his canvas jacket the Christmas before when I helped him hang it on the hook by the front door. He was going to ask you. I did not say anything. I figured the answer was yours to find out in your own time. Then February came, and the doctor said the word Alzheimer's, and you started driving home every weekend, then every other day. Then you stopped going back to Asheville altogether. Theo came to the house once in April. You walked with him to the car, and you talked for 20 minutes in the gravel. I watched from the kitchen window. I should not have, but I did. And then he drove away, and you came back inside, and you did not say a word about it. Not to me, not to your mother, not to anyone. I never saw him again. You never mentioned him. You chose your mother over your own life, and you did not ask anybody to notice. But I noticed, Margot. I always noticed. You bathed your mother when she called you a stranger. You fed her when she threw the plate. Some nights you sat with her while she screamed at shadows, and every morning you got up and you did it all again. You did it for 5 years. You did it without help. You did it without complaint. I am writing this letter on a Sunday afternoon, sitting at the desk in the hidden room. You will not turn 40 for 2 more years. By then, your mother will probably be gone, and I might be gone too. The doctors tell me my heart is not what it used to be, so I am writing the letter early, so that it is here when you find it. You will be 40 years old, Margot, and you will have given more of yourself to other people than most of us give in a lifetime. I need you to know this. I see you. I have always seen you. You stayed when it cost you everything, and you never once asked for anything in return. This garage, this room, everything I have built in here, it is yours. It was always going to be yours. I just needed time to finish it. Happy birthday, Bug. Love, Dad." Margot pressed the letter against her chest. She closed her eyes. She sat in her father's desk chair with his words against her heart, and she let herself cry in a way she had not since the day they had buried him. When she opened her eyes, she saw a fifth envelope in the false bottom, smaller than the others, no birthday on the front, just 2 words in her father's handwriting, "For Margot." She opened it. "When you find this, go see Otis. He has what you need. Trust him. Trust yourself. I love you. Dad." She put all 5 letters in her jacket pocket. She closed the drawer. She stood up. She walked out of the hidden room. She locked the door. She locked the garage. She got into her car. The letters sat against her ribs, and she could feel the weight of her father's handwriting through the fabric. She started the engine. She drove toward the hardware store. The hardware store sat on the edge of town, where the asphalt of the county road met the gravel of the old farm route. A flat brick building, aluminum sign above the door reading "Brennan's Hardware" in green letters that had been hand-painted by Otis's father in 1962 and touched up by Otis himself every spring for the last 40 years. The store was closed. It was a Sunday. The lot was empty except for Otis's pickup, but the light in the back office was on. Margot pulled into the gravel. She killed the engine. She sat there for a moment with her hands on the wheel, the letters from her father pressed against her ribs through the fabric of her jacket pocket. The wind moved across the lot. A piece of paper drifted along the base of the building, lifted, settled, lifted again. She got out. She walked to the glass door. She knocked. Otis appeared from behind the counter. He moved slowly, the way men do when their knees have carried them for 68 years on hard concrete floors. He unlocked the door without speaking. He held it open. She stepped inside. The smell hit her first. The smell of every hardware store she had ever known. Iron and oil and cut wood. Sawdust on the floor near the lumber aisle. The faint copper scent of fresh-cut keys at the bench by the register. It was the smell of her father. She stood in the middle of the aisle for a moment. She did not move. Otis watched her. "You read the letters." "All 4 of them." He nodded. He led her through the empty store to the office in the back. It was a small room behind the register crowded with inventory binders and a green metal filing cabinet that had been there longer than Margot had been alive. The window looked out on the gravel lot and a row of dogwood trees. Otis went to the filing cabinet. He pulled open the bottom drawer. He reached into the back corner. He brought out a thick manila envelope, sealed with clear packing tape, her father's handwriting on the front. "For Margot, to be opened only after she has found the room." Otis held it out to her. "He gave me this on a Sunday afternoon about 2 years before he died," Otis said. "Made me promise 3 things. Do not open it. Do not give it to anyone except her. And do not hand it over until she has found the room on her own." Margot took the envelope. It was heavier than she expected. She could feel folded paper inside, more than one document, layered, thick. "You could have told me about the room, Otis." He did not want that. Otis sat down on the edge of the desk. He folded his hands. "He wanted you to find it yourself. He said if she does not look, then she is not the person I think she is." Otis shrugged. "He knew you would look." Margot sat in the office chair. She turned the envelope over in her hands. She broke the tape seal. She opened it. 3 items inside. A stapled document on heavy legal paper. A sealed letter addressed to Garrett and Meredith. A sealed letter addressed to her. She opened the legal document first. It was a codicil to her father's will, notarized and witnessed. The witnesses were Otis Brennan and a notary from the county clerk's office in the town 2 counties over. The date was 2 years before Hollis had died. 1 page, typed in careful legal language, her father's signature at the bottom in the same steady hand she recognized from the journal. The codicil stated that all contents of the detached garage at 14 Linden Lane, including but not limited to furniture, tools, materials, journals, financial accounts, and intellectual property associated with the name H.W. Sterling, were the sole and exclusive property of Margot E. Wexler, to be transferred immediately upon discovery. She read it twice, then she looked at Otis. Is this real? He had a lawyer draw it up, a different one, not Harlow. He did not want Harlow involved. Drove an hour and a half to find a man who had never met Garrett. Otis crossed his arms. Your father spent 2 years getting it right. The notarization, the witness signatures, the language. He wanted it bulletproof. Margot set the codicil on the desk. She looked at the other 2 items. The letter addressed to Garrett and Meredith. The letter addressed to her. She reached for her own letter first. She opened it carefully. Margot, if you are reading this, then you found the room, and you found the desk, and you found the letters I wrote you, and Otis kept his word. I knew he would. I am sorry I could not tell you while I was alive. I wanted to. There were nights when you were sitting with your mother and I was in the next room, and I almost told you everything, but I needed to make sure it was protected first. Your brother is a lawyer. Your sister knows how to make a claim. I had to build a wall around it before I could rest. Everything in that garage is yours. The furniture, the tools, the account, the name, all of it. I started building before you were born, and I kept going until the day my hands could not hold a pencil. The ones who stay deserve the most. But here is the part I need you to hear, Margot. I have done my work. I have built the wall. I have signed the papers. I have made it so that no one can take any of it from you, no matter what they say in a courtroom. What you do with it now is yours to decide. If you want to share some of it with your brother and your sister, you can. If you do not want to share, you do not have to. I am not asking you to do anything. I am not telling you what is fair. I am giving it to you, and I am leaving the rest to you. That is the part nobody ever gave you. The right to choose. Your brother chose his career. Your sister chose her distance. Your mother and I chose each other. You spent 5 years choosing us. Now it is your turn to choose what your own life looks like. I trust you. I have trusted you since you were 10 years old, and you tore a sandwich in half for a boy who had nothing. I trusted you when you became a nurse. I trusted you when you came home. I am trusting you now. Use it for the life you put on hold, Margot, the one you kept postponing because you were taking care of us. You deserve a home, a real one, with a table big enough for the people you choose to love, and a bookshelf full of books you actually have time to read, and a chair where you can sit and not worry about anyone but yourself. I love you, Bug. I am proud of you. I was proud of you when you were 10 and you tore your sandwich in half, and I am proud of you now, Dad. Margot folded the letter. She pressed it flat against her chest. She breathed in and out slowly, the way she had been trained to breathe through emergencies in the back of an ambulance, the way she had breathed in the lawyer's office 2 weeks before when she had heard the words $10 and felt her world shift on its axis. She looked at the other envelope, the one addressed to her siblings. She turned it over in her hands. She did not open it. This one was not hers to read first. He told me what was in it, Otis said quietly. Not the exact words, But the idea, he paused. He said it was the hardest thing he ever wrote. Margot put the envelope to her siblings in her pocket next to the birthday letters. She picked up the codicil. I need to take this to Harlow. I figured you would. She drove to Harlow's office the next morning. Harlow read the codicil at his desk. He checked the notary seal. He called the notary's office. He confirmed the witness signatures. He set the document down. He took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. It is valid, he said, properly executed, independently prepared, notarized. This codicil overrides any ambiguity in the original will regarding the garage contents, and the bank account is a joint account with rights of survivorship, which means it was never part of the estate to begin with. So Garrett cannot challenge it. He can challenge anything he wants. That is the nature of the law. But this document is clean, Margot. Your father understood the law better than most of my clients. He understood a lot of things. Harlow looked at her across the desk. Yes, he said. I can see that now. Margot asked Harlow to arrange a meeting. Garrett, Meredith, his office. She wanted this settled. It took 5 days. Garrett flew in from Chicago on a Thursday. Meredith drove up from the hotel where she was staying. They came into the office at the appointed time. They sat in the same 3 chairs, in the same row, in the same order as the first reading of the will. Garrett on the left, Meredith on the right, Margot in the middle. Harlow placed the codicil on the desk. He slid it across. This document was discovered among your father's private papers. He glanced at Margot. She nodded. It is a codicil to the will, independently prepared and notarized 2 years before your father's death. It grants Margot sole ownership of all contents within the garage at 14 Linden Lane, including furniture, tools, financial accounts, and associated intellectual property. Garrett picked up the document. He scanned it once, quickly, the way he read everything, the way a man reads who has spent 25 years drowning in paperwork. Then he went back to the top and read it again, slowly. He set it on the desk. He pressed his thumb against his temple. She could see the tension building in his jaw, the way his shoulders squared. She had watched this happen her whole life. Garrett did not shout. Garrett went quiet and rigid. He went into the place where lawyers go when they realize a case is no longer winnable, the place where they begin to count their losses. He planned this, Garrett said. His voice was very low. He sat down and planned all of this. The $10 appraisal, the hidden room, the codicil. He made it so that everything went to Margot and there was nothing we could do about it. Nobody spoke. Why? Garrett looked at her. Why would he do that? Margot reached into her jacket. She pulled out the sealed letter, the one Hollis had addressed to Garrett and Meredith. She set it on the desk between them. He wrote this for both of you. Meredith reached for it first. She opened the envelope carefully. She unfolded 2 sheets of paper covered on both sides in Hollis's handwriting. She read the first few lines aloud quietly, then stopped. She read the rest to herself. Her lips barely moved. When she finished, she passed the letter to Garrett without looking at him. Her face had gone white. Garrett took the letter. He read. Hollis's words were plain and unhurried. He had written the way he had always spoken, without decoration, without raising his voice. The letter began and ended the same way. I love you both. Between those 2 bookends, he told them the truth. For 2 years after Marjorie got sick, Hollis had called Garrett every week. Garrett had answered maybe half the time and had talked about his caseload, his car, his apartment. When Hollis had told him about his mother's decline, Garrett had said, "That is tough, Dad. Then the conversation had ended. The letter mentioned the money Meredith had sent. 2 checks over 5 years. Margot had used the money for diapers and medication. Hollis did not say whether he thought 2 checks was enough. The number spoke for itself. Then he wrote about Margot, how she had given up her apartment, her job, her routine, how she had bathed their mother every day for years, how she had held his hand when his own strength gave out, how she had done everything they should have been there to do, and had never asked for anything. I love you both, but love does not mean I am blind. The house went to Garrett because Garrett wanted a house. The savings went to Meredith because Meredith wanted money. The garage went to Margot because she was the only one who would walk inside and look. The letter said he was not angry. He knew they had their own lives. Chicago was far, Scottsdale was far, and none of it was simple. But Margot was there. Every day, Margot was there. The last line. I hope you understand why I did what I did. If you do not understand, now read this letter again in 5 years. Garrett set the letter on the desk. His hand stayed flat on the paper. He stared at the wall behind Harlow's head for a long time. He planned this, he said again, but the anger was gone from his voice. His voice was smaller now, smaller than Margot had ever heard it. Meredith was crying. She was not making noise. The tears ran down her face. She made no move to wipe them. She was looking at her hands in her lap as if she had never seen them before. He knew, Meredith said. The whole time, he watched everything, and he never said a word. He noticed everything, Margot said. He just did not say it out loud. Garrett turned to her. He opened his mouth. He closed it again. He looked at the codicil, the letter, the lawyer across the desk. Then he looked at his own hands. I am not going to file, he said. Harlow nodded. The joint account alone puts it outside the estate, Garrett said. He was speaking now in a voice that was almost gentle, the lawyer's training breaking down the situation as if he were explaining it to someone else, as if speaking the law could be a kind of shelter. The codicil is clean. I have seen enough documents to know when they are airtight. He paused. But that is not why I am not filing. Nobody asked him to explain. He did not need to. Garrett stood up. He buttoned his jacket the way he always did. Then he stopped. He looked at Margot. I should have come home. His voice caught on the last word. Yeah, Margot said. You should have. He stood there for a moment longer. He nodded once. He walked out. His footsteps were slower than they had been the first time he had left this office. The sound of his shoes on the hallway floor faded slowly. The door at the foot of the stairs opened, closed. Meredith stayed. She was still in her chair. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at Margot. He saw us. Yes, he saw exactly who we were, and he still signed the letter Dad. That is who he was. Meredith squeezed Margot's hand on the armrest. She held it for a few seconds. Then she let go. She walked out. Harlow waited until the door closed. Your father was a remarkable man, Margot. He was a hardware store employee who built furniture in a garage. He would want you to call him that. Harlow smiled for the first time since she had met him. Fair enough. She drove to the garage that afternoon. She let herself in. She walked through the workshop. She opened the hidden door. She stepped into the room. The light was soft. Late afternoon slanting through the high window. She sat down at the writing desk. She took her father's letter out of her pocket, the one he had written for her, the one Otis had kept in his safe for 2 years. She read it again. What you do with it now is yours to decide. She sat for a long time. The chair was steady beneath her. The room was quiet. Outside on Linden Lane, the wind moved through the kudzu. She thought about her brother. She thought about her sister. She thought about her father, who had spent 2 years preparing a wall to protect her from them, and who had then, in the same letter, handed her the keys to the wall. She could have done what her father had not been able to do. She could have kept the wall, but she remembered something else. She remembered Otis sitting in the dining chair the first day, looking around the room, saying that her father had been the smartest man he had ever known. Hollis had built a wall, but he had not built a door he could close behind it. The door went both ways, and he had given the choice to her. She thought about Meredith's face when she had read the sketch beneath the rocking chair. For Margot, when she is tired, when she needs to rest. She thought about Garrett's voice when he had said, "I should have come home." She did not owe them anything, but that was not the question. The question was who she wanted to be after the walls came down, after the lawyer's office, after the funeral, after the 5 years. The question was, what kind of woman walked out the other side of all of it? She stood up. She walked to the workbench. She picked up a piece of pine from the lumber stack, a small board, 8 inches by 12, already smoothed on one face. The grain was tight and clean. She turned it in her hands. She set it on the bench. She opened the drawer where the chisels lay. She lifted one out. The handle was worn smooth from her father's grip. The blade was honed so sharp it could split a hair. She turned it in the light. She did not know how to do this. She did not know how to dovetail a joint. She did not know how to make a corner sit square. She did not know how to plane a board without tearing the grain, or how to sand a finish until it caught the light the way her father's pieces caught the light. But she had watched him as a child. She had stood at the door of the workshop when she was small, and she had watched him plane a board, and she had seen the long curls of pine peel off the blade and fall to the floor like spring shavings. She had seen him glue a joint. She had seen him press it together and hold it in his big hands and count under his breath. She had not understood any of it then. She had only known that what came out of those hands was always more beautiful than what had gone in. She set the chisel down. She walked to the bookshelf in the hidden room. She had noticed earlier that there were books on the bottom shelf, 3 of them. She had not looked at them. She had been too overwhelmed. She knelt down. The books were woodworking manuals, old hardcover editions, library books originally that her father must have bought from a sale years ago. The dust jackets were faded. The spines were creased with use. On the inside cover of the top book was a small inscription in pencil, "For when she is ready." Dad, he had known she would not just walk away. He had known she would want to make something. He had known her better than she had known herself. She picked up the book. She sat down at the workbench. She opened to the first chapter. She began to read. She spent 2 weeks at it. She took the workbench apart and reorganized it, the way she had once organized supply rooms at the hospital, item by item, until she knew where every chisel and every plane and every clamp lived. She practiced cuts on scrap pine. She ruined 3 boards. She wasted half a pound of glue. She drew 100 straight lines, and then she drew them again. She sliced her thumb open on a chisel and drove herself to the emergency room where the doctor on duty, a friend of hers from her old shifts, stitched her up without asking too many questions and gave her a tetanus shot and told her she was an idiot for not wearing gloves. She bought gloves. She kept practicing. The mornings were cold. She wore one of her father's flannel shirts over her sweatshirt. She made coffee on a hot plate she had set up on the workbench. She listened to the same radio station her father had always listened to, the AM station out of Greensboro that played news in the mornings and old country songs in the afternoons. She did not turn on the radio every day. Sometimes she preferred the quiet. She read the woodworking books at night. sitting up in her old bedroom at the house, the lamp on a pencil in her hand to mark the pages. She read about wood grain and seasonal movement and the way a joint had to be cut to allow for the way wood would breathe across years. She read about dovetails and mortise and tenon joints and the long history of furniture making in America. She read about a man named Sam Malouf who had made rocking chairs in California. She read about the Shakers and about the chairs they had built that hung from pegs on their walls. She read until her eyes burned, and then she slept, and then she got up and went back to the workshop. She made mistakes, a lot of them. She cut a board too short and could not put the length back on it. She glued a joint backward and had to break it apart with a chisel and a wooden mallet, and she ruined the wood in the process. She sanded a finish unevenly, and the light caught it in patches that made the whole piece look like a child had done it. She threw out more work than she kept, but she got better. And then on a Thursday, in the third week in the cold morning light, she made her first box. It was a small thing, 6 inches by 8, pine, dovetailed at the corners. The joints were not as tight as her father's had been. The lid did not quite fit flush. The hinges were brass screws she had taken from a coffee can on his workbench screws he had probably bought in 1981 and never used, but the box held. She set it on the workbench. She turned it in the light. She ran her thumb along the seam where the lid met the body. She made another one, 2 boxes, one for Garrett, one for Meredith. The second box was tighter than the first. The lid sat flush. The hinges worked smoothly when she opened and closed it. She had learned something in the 3 days between them. She sat for a moment looking at the 2 boxes side by side, and she thought about how 40 years of practice would have changed everything she did not yet know how to do. She drove to the hardware store. She walked to the back office. Otis was there. He looked up from a stack of invoices. She set the 2 boxes on his desk. "Did Dad write anything for them?" she said. Otis looked at the boxes. He looked at her. His eyes were quiet. He did. He stood up. He walked to the filing cabinet. He opened the same bottom drawer. He pulled out 2 more envelopes. They had been there the whole time, for Garrett, for Meredith. "He said only if you wanted to give them," Otis said. "He said he was not asking you to. He said it was your call." Margot took the envelopes. She put one inside each box. She closed the lids. She set them side by side on the workbench in her father's hidden room. She wrote a small note on a piece of paper. "This is from Dad, and from me, Margot." She mailed them on a Monday morning. Garrett's to his office in Chicago, Meredith's to her place in Scottsdale. She did not call. She did not write any other note. She did not include a return address on the package, though they both knew where she lived. She let the boxes do the talking. 10 days later, Ellsworth Pierce called from Raleigh. She had not met him yet. She had only seen his name in her father's journal. Sold to Pierce, sold to Pierce, sold to Pierce. She had imagined a thin, elegant man with white hair and a soft voice, the kind of man who handled galleries. When he called, his voice was deeper than she had expected. A working voice, a man who carried things. "Miss Wexler." "Yes." "Your father told me to call you. When you found the room, I have something he asked me to deliver, and I have news that you should know." She drove to Raleigh the next day. The drive took 2 hours. She took the old highway through tobacco country, past silos and pecan groves and the small Baptist churches that sat at the crossroads. The trees were beginning to flower. There were redbuds and dogwoods and forsythia. The countryside was waking up. She rolled the windows down, and the air smelled like turned earth and the warming green of early spring. She thought, as she drove about, how many times her father had made this same trip, how many pieces of furniture had ridden in the bed of his pickup along this same road, how he had never told anyone where he was going, how her mother had always known. The gallery was on a quiet street near the art museum, a storefront with one window and a heavy oak door. The sign in the window said Pierce in small, careful letters. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of lemon oil. 3 pieces of furniture stood on the wide pine floor: a dresser, a small desk, a chair, each piece on its own pedestal, each with its own brass plaque. H.W. Sterling. The price tags discreetly turned away from the door. Ellsworth Pierce was 60 years old. He wore a wool sweater and reading glasses on a chain around his neck. His hands were the hands of a man who had handled fine wood for a long time. He looked at Margot when she came through the door, and she saw something in his face she had not expected: recognition. "You have your father's eyes," he said. She did not know what to say to that. He led her to a small office in the back. There was a wooden box on his desk. Maple, hand-fitted. The lid was hinged with brass. She knew before he said anything that her father had made it. "He left this with me 3 years ago," Ellsworth said. "He said you would come for it eventually. He said I should give it to you when you found the room. Not before." He slid the box across the desk. She opened it. Inside were photographs, a stack of them, held together with a piece of cotton string. The top photograph was of a baby, newborn, wrapped in a blue blanket. Her brother Garrett, at 3 days old in 1979, held by her mother in a hospital bed. She turned to the next photograph. Meredith as a newborn, 1982. She turned to the next one. Margot herself, 1987, wrapped in a yellow blanket, held in her father's arms, his face turned toward her, his expression so naked with love that Margot had to put the photograph down for a moment. She kept turning. Behind each photograph was a small note in her father's handwriting, just a few sentences about the day the child was born, about what he had been thinking, about a small private hope he had held for them in that first hour of their life before they had grown into anything except themselves. For Garrett, the day he was born, I sat in the hospital and I watched his hands clench and unclench in his sleep. I thought, those are the hands that will build his life. I hope he uses them well. For Meredith, the day she was born, your mother held her and sang to her in a voice I had never heard before, soft, like nothing in the world. I thought that is what it sounds like to be loved, without conditions. I hope she carries that with her. For Margot, the day she was born, I held her and she looked at me, and I knew, I cannot explain how, but I knew, this one would stay, this one would understand. I hope I am ready when the time comes. Margot closed the box. She did not cry. She sat very still, the way her father had sat very still in his own workshop, the way men sat still when they were absorbing something too large to react to. "There is more," Ellsworth said. He waited until she looked up. "The North Carolina Museum of Art is opening a retrospective. H.W. Sterling, 40 Years of American Craft. Your father arranged it with the director 3 years ago. He paid for the gallery space himself. He commissioned the catalog. He provided the pieces. Everything is in place. The opening is in 3 months." He paused. "Your father left the decision to you, whether to keep his name a secret or whether to let the public know who H.W. Sterling actually was. The museum will do whatever you say. The pieces in the show are mine on consignment. Your private pieces, the ones in the hidden room, will never be required to leave the garage. The choice of the name is yours alone." Margot looked out the window. A dogwood tree was just beginning to flower in the small courtyard behind the gallery. The light was thin and clean. She thought for a long moment. She thought about her father's wardrobe of 4 work pants and 7 flannel shirts. She thought about the apron he had worn behind the counter at Brennan's Hardware for 30 years with his name stitched in red thread above the pocket. She thought about how the men in this town had known him, the men who had bought their hammers from him, the men who had walked into the store on a winter morning and warmed their hands at the small space heater near the register and asked Hollis about the weather and gotten back a quiet single sentence in reply. They had liked him. They had not known him. They had not known what he was capable of. She thought, too, about all the men in the small towns across this country who worked their lives in places where no one ever asked what was inside them, whose hands made things that nobody saw, who came home each evening and washed up at the kitchen sink and sat down to dinner and never once said what they had done with their day. Men her father's age, men older, men dying without anyone knowing that they had been more than the work they had been paid to do. She thought about how many of those men were her father. She thought about how few of them would ever have someone walk into a hidden room behind a locked door and find what they had made. Hollis Wexler, she said. Ellsworth nodded. He had been ready for any answer. That is the name on the show. He picked up a pencil. He wrote it down. The retrospective would open as Hollis Wexler, 40 years of American craft. The name H.W. Sterling, the long, careful pseudonym her father had carried for 4 decades, would be allowed to retire. They talked for another hour. Ellsworth showed her photographs of the gallery space. He walked her through the catalog his designer was producing. He told her about the collectors who would be there opening night. He asked her if she wanted to speak. She said no, not yet, perhaps at the closing, when she had more time to find the right words. He said he understood. He said her father had been the same way. When she got up to leave, he walked her to the door. He was the finest craftsman I have worked with in 40 years in this business, Ellsworth said. I want you to know that. People will say it more publicly in 3 months, but I am telling you now. She nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. He held the door open. She stepped out into the spring air. She drove home through the long, warming countryside, and she did not tell Otis, and she did not call her siblings, and she let the news sit inside her for 1 quiet week before she did anything with it. 6 months later, she moved into a craftsman cottage on the west side of town. It was small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that opened into a living room, a porch with a clear view of the tree line. The previous owner had let the place go, but the bones were solid. Margot knew bones. She had been an emergency room nurse long enough to know that what mattered was the structure underneath. She did most of the repairs herself with Otis, stopping by on Saturdays to help with the things she could not do alone. She replaced the rotten porch boards. She rehung the front door, which had been sagging on its hinges. She tore out the carpet in the bedroom and refinished the original pine floors underneath. She painted the kitchen a soft, warm white that caught the afternoon light. She furnished it with her father's pieces. The dining table went in the center of the kitchen, 5 of the 6 chairs around it. The 6th she kept at the workshop. The bookshelf filled the living room wall. She started loading it the day she moved in. She began with the boxes of books she had packed when she had left Asheville 5 years before and had never opened since. Novels, nursing textbooks, a field guide to birds her mother had given her when she was 12. She had thought when she packed those boxes that she would unpack them within a month. She had not opened them again in 5 years. They had moved with her into her parents' house, and they had sat in the spare bedroom there for the whole time she had been a caregiver. Now they came out one by one, and she put them on the shelves of the bookshelf her father had built, and she ran her hand along the spines and remembered who she had been when she had bought each one. The bed frame with the walnut headboard went in the bedroom. The writing desk sat by the window in the spare room, which she used as a study. She kept the journal in the top drawer. She kept the birthday letters in the false bottom beneath it. She kept her mother's small wooden box on the shelf above the desk, the one with the carved leaf pattern, where her mother's notes still lay folded on its square of dark felt. The rocking chair went by the front window in the living room, where the evening light was best. She kept the blanket chest at the foot of the bed. Inside it, she folded the quilt her mother had made years ago, back when Marjorie had still known how to thread a needle. The fabric was worn thin in places. The stitching was uneven, but Margot pressed it flat and she closed the lid gently every time. The garage on Linden Lane stayed where it was. She cleaned the workshop. She replaced the overhead light. She oiled every tool on the pegboard. Then she hung a wooden sign above the door, the Hollis Wexler Workshop. She used his real name. The secret had served its purpose. There was no reason to keep it anymore. Otis helped her get the space ready. He brought a spare set of hand tools from the store, and he mounted a new pegboard beside the original one. He installed better lighting. He swept out the back corner where her father had stored his lumber and helped her build a small rack for student materials. He put up a coat hook by the door. He brought a coffee pot from his own kitchen and set it on a small table near the entrance. When she tried to pay him, he waved her off. "Your father kept me company for 30 years, Otis said. He tapped a small brad nail into the new pegboard. "I owe him more than a set of chisels." She taught her first class on a Saturday in September. 4 people showed up: a retired postman who wanted to build a birdhouse, a teenage boy whose mother had dropped him off on the way to work, a woman in her 50s who had always wanted to learn dovetail joints, and Otis, who sat on a stool in the corner and corrected Margot's technique when she got the wood grain wrong. The second week, 7 people came. The third week, 9. By October, she was running 2 sessions every Saturday, and she had a waiting list. She did not advertise. Word traveled on its own. Someone told a neighbor who mentioned it to a friend at church who brought a coworker. People showed up because they wanted to build things, or because they wanted to be around other people who were building things, or because they needed a place to go on Saturday morning that was not their kitchen table. She did not charge. She had thought about it, but her father had spent 40 years building furniture for free in a hidden room, and something about putting a price on the workshop felt wrong. The hardware store donated scrap wood. A lumber yard across town sent offcuts once a month. Otis kept the tool library stocked. The retrospective opened in October. Margot drove to Raleigh the night before to see the installation. The gallery had given her a private hour. She walked through the rooms by herself, slowly looking at the work her father had spent his life making. 30 pieces arranged across 3 rooms with white walls and warm overhead light. Pedestals where it mattered, open floor space where the larger pieces could stand, the catalog stacked on a table by the door. Hollis Wexler, 40 years of American craft. She had not expected the photographs. The museum had blown them up large and hung them on the gallery walls between the pieces, black and white shots of her father at the workbench, of his hands, of the inside of the garage at Linden Lane. The museum staff had visited the garage in August with her permission, and one of their photographers had spent 3 days quietly documenting the space. She had not seen the prints until now. In one of them, Her father was bent over a chisel, his face in profile. The light came in through the high window. He looked exactly like every working man she had ever known, and he looked exactly like himself, and she stood in front of the photograph for a long time without moving. A man from the museum staff came up beside her quietly. "He would have hated this," she said. "Yes," the man said, "probably." "Good. That means we did it right." The man laughed once softly and walked away. Opening night, she stood at the back of the room with a glass of wine she did not drink. She watched strangers walk through the gallery. She listened to them talk about her father's work. She heard a woman in a gray dress say, "This is the kind of furniture you fall in love with." She heard a man with white hair say, "Look at the joints, my God, look at the joints." Ellsworth Pierce stood near the front of the gallery, talking with a collector from Atlanta. He looked up once across the room and met her eyes and lifted his glass to her. Margot lifted hers back. She left before the speeches. She drove home in the dark with the windows down. The October air was cool and smelled of wood smoke. She did not turn on the radio. The young woman showed up on a Tuesday in November. She came alone. Jeans, a gray sweatshirt with a rip in the sleeve, her hair pulled back. She stood in the doorway of the workshop, and she watched the afternoon class for 10 minutes before Margot noticed her. "Can I help you?" "I saw the sign." The woman looked past Margot at the workbench, at the tools on the pegboard, at the pieces of a half-built step stool spread across the table. "I do not know anything about woodworking." Most people do not when they walk in. The woman was quiet for a moment. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "I just left my husband," she said. Margot looked at her. She was maybe 30. She stood with the careful posture of a woman who had spent a long time learning to take up less space. Margot had seen that posture in the emergency room, in waiting rooms, in the faces of women who came in with injuries. They explained with a careful, practiced sentence. "We are building bookshelves this week," Margot said. "Come in. Start with the joints. Everything else follows from there." The woman came back every Tuesday. Her name was Rachel. She did not talk much for the first 2 weeks. She measured, she cut, she sanded, she was slow. But it was the slow of someone paying attention, not the slow of someone unsure. Her bookshelf took 3 weeks. The joints were uneven. The shelves wobbled slightly when she tested them with a stack of books, but it held. One evening after class, she stayed behind. Margot found her at the workbench at 7 o'clock, sanding a shelf bracket she had already finished. "You okay?" "I am on a friend's couch." The woman set the sandpaper down. "I have been looking at apartments, but I cannot get a deposit together. I have not been working since I left." Margot wiped her hands on a rag. She leaned against the bench. She looked at the pegboard on the wall, her father's tools hanging in their outlines, everything in its place. "I could use help around here," she said. "Tuesdays and Thursdays, cleaning up the shop after class, keeping the tool library organized, helping the new students get started. 15 an hour. I am terrible at keeping this place straight. Ask Otis." Rachel looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was the first one Margot had seen from her in 3 weeks. "I can start Thursday. I will see you Thursday." 3 weeks later, Rachel had a deposit saved, a studio apartment on the east side, and a bookshelf she had built with her own hands standing against the wall in her living room. She sent Margot a photograph. The text below it said, "The joints are crooked, but it holds." Margot wrote back, "That is all it needs to do." Garrett called on a Sunday morning in March. Margot was on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the crows argue over something in the grass near the tree line. "Margot." His voice was different, quieter, stripped of the certainty she had heard in it her whole life. Garrett, I was in town last week, had a deposition at the county courthouse. On the way back to the airport, I took a detour. I drove past the old house. A pause. Somebody else has different curtains in the windows, different mailbox. The whole lawn looks smaller somehow. Things look different when you come back. A long silence, long enough that she checked the screen to make sure the call was still connected. Margot, yes, I am sorry. He said it plainly. He did not add for not coming home or for the lawyer or for what I said in Harlow's office. He said the two words and let them stand on their own. Thank you, Garrett. Another pause. How is the workshop going? Busy. We had 14 people last Saturday. That is good. That is really good. He cleared his throat. Listen, I do not want to take your whole morning. You are not. He was quiet for a moment. The box you sent me, with the letter inside, I keep it on my desk. I look at it every day. And Dad's letter, what he wrote to us, I think about it more than I expected to. Margot watched the crows. One of them had won the argument and was strutting across the grass with something in its beak. You can come visit, she said, if you want to see the workshop. He was quiet for a beat. I would like that. Okay. He hung up. She sat on the porch and finished her coffee. She did not know if Garrett would come. Maybe he would. Maybe he would mean to and get busy and let it slide the way he always had. But the words were there now. The door was open, and that was enough for one Sunday morning. A letter from Meredith arrived in the mail that same week. 1 page, handwritten, on plain white paper. Margot, I have been thinking about Dad's letter. I have read it 5 times. Every time I get to the part about the checks, I put it down and walk around the house for a while before I can pick it up again. 2 checks, 5 years. I do not know how I let myself believe that was enough. I think some part of me knew it was not. Even then, it was easier to write a check than to drive home and sit with Mom when she did not recognize anyone. You did what I could not, or what I chose not to do, which is worse. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am just saying what is true. You were there. I was not. The box you sent, I put it on my dresser, next to a photograph of Mom from when she was young. I look at the 2 of them in the morning before I leave for work. The box and the picture. I do not know what I am looking for when I do that, but I do it. If you ever want to talk, I am here now. I know that does not fix anything, but I wanted you to hear it. Love, Meredith. Margot folded the letter and put it in the writing desk drawer next to the birthday letters. Garrett came in May. He flew in on a Thursday afternoon. He rented a car at the airport in Raleigh. He drove the 2 hours to town, and he checked into the small inn on Main Street where their parents had once celebrated a wedding anniversary. He called her from the parking lot. I am here, he said. I am at the workshop. I will come over. He showed up an hour later. He was wearing jeans and a button-down shirt and a pair of work boots she had not seen on him in 20 years. He stood in the doorway of the workshop, and he looked around at the workbench and the pegboard and the half-built furniture spread across the floor. He did not say anything for a long time. Dad's tools, he said finally. Yes. He walked the length of the pegboard. He touched a plane that was hanging in its outline. He took it down. He turned it in his hands. He set it back where it belonged. He had nice tools. He took care of them. Garrett walked to the back wall. He stopped at the door of the hidden room. He had not been inside it since the Saturday morning the previous fall when he had stood in the center of it and threatened to take their father to court. He looked at her. Can I? Yes. He opened the door. He went in. He stood in the middle of the room for a long time. He looked at the dining table, at the bookshelf, at the rocking chair. The tags were gone now. She had taken them off when she had moved the furniture into the cottage, but the pieces themselves stood where they had always stood, and Garrett walked among them slowly, the way a man walks through a cathedral he has not been to in a long time. He sat down in one of the dining chairs. He built all of this for you. Yes, I did not understand the first time I was here. I know. He ran his hand along the table. I have been thinking about something. The last time I saw him alive, it was at his birthday 2 years ago. He was sitting on the back porch drinking a beer. I was in town for one night and I was about to leave for the airport. I sat down next to him for 10 minutes. I do not even remember what we talked about. I just remember that I was checking my watch. Garrett looked at his hands. I was checking my watch. She did not say anything. I do not know how to fix that, Margot. I do not know if it can be fixed. She thought for a moment. Some things cannot be fixed, Garrett. You just have to live differently from now on. That is all anyone gets to do. He nodded slowly. They sat in the hidden room for a long time. The light through the high window moved across the floor. Eventually he stood up. I should go, he said. I have a flight. She walked him out to his car. He stood by the driver's door with his hand on the handle. Margot. Yes. Thank you for letting me come. She nodded. He got in the car. He drove away. She watched him go down Linden Lane past the kudzu and the old shed until the car turned the corner by the railroad tracks and was gone. She went back into the workshop. She picked up the chisel she had been using before he arrived. She finished the cut she had started. She did not know yet how the rest of their relationship would go, whether he would come back, whether he would let years pass before he tried again, whether she would forgive him fully or only partially, or whether forgiveness was even the right word for what she would do with him in her life going forward. She did not need to know yet. For now, the cut was the thing that needed her attention. She made it carefully, the way her father would have. Summer came. The workshop filled with light. The crows in the yard at her cottage built a nest in the maple tree behind the house. Margot taught classes every Saturday and ran an open studio on Wednesday evenings. Rachel moved up to teaching the basics class on Tuesdays. A new young man started coming in on Thursdays, an Iraq veteran in his late 40s who had been struggling to find something to do with his hands. He learned fast. He laughed at his own mistakes. He started bringing his teenage son. In July, Ellsworth Pierce called from Raleigh. The museum had requested a year-long extension of the retrospective. They were getting record attendance. Margot said yes. In August, Meredith called for the first time. They talked for an hour. Most of it was small, some of it was not. Meredith did not ask for anything. She did not apologize again. She just talked. Margot listened. At the end of the call, Meredith said, "Can I call you again next week?" Margot said yes. In September, on the first cool morning of the fall, Margot sat in the rocking chair by the front window of her cottage with a cup of coffee. The light was long and golden, the last of the day coming through the glass and falling across the bookshelf and the floor. Her coffee mug was on the dining table. The house smelled like linseed oil, the same oil her father had used in the workshop for as long as she could remember, the same oil she rubbed into the furniture once a month to keep the wood alive. She picked up the birthday letters from the desk, 4 envelopes in her father's handwriting. She added her mother's small note from the wooden box, the one that had begun all of it. She held them in her lap. 2 parents, 2 long, quiet lives, 2 voices that had never asked her for anything. She rocked slowly. The chair moved beneath her, steady, Even, she thought about Hollis, just her father, the man who had brought her to the garage on Saturday mornings and had let her sit in the truck with a juice box and a coloring book while he had gone inside and built things, the man who had said just tinkering bug, the man who had watched her tear a sandwich in half for a boy who had nothing and had gone home that evening and had started writing her letters, the man who had spent his whole life building things for the people he loved and had never once needed anyone to know. She thought about Marjorie, the woman who had kept his secret for 40 years, who had carried his pseudonym inside her marriage like a small, steady flame, who had been the only person in the world he had told, who had loved a craftsman quietly, without speaking of it. She thought about Rachel, who was working at the workshop tonight, sweeping up the day's shavings, about the Iraq veteran's son who had stayed late on Thursday to ask Margot if she would teach him how to build a small box for his mother, about the retired postman who was bringing his birdhouse to a county fair in the fall, about all the people who came through the doors of the workshop on Linden Lane each week, each one carrying something, each one leaving with something a little smaller in their hands and a little quieter in their chest than what they had brought in. She thought about Garrett, who had called the week before to ask if he could send her a bottle of bourbon for her birthday. She thought about Meredith, who had started signing her letters love instead of best. She thought about Theo, somewhere in the mountains of western North Carolina, with a life she would never know about, a wife maybe, children, a quiet kitchen on Tuesday nights. She hoped so. She hoped he had what she had wanted to give him and had not been able to. She thought about how much of life is choosing and how much of it is being chosen, and how the difference between the two is not always clear at the time. The light faded. The house went quiet. Margot closed her eyes and let the chair rock her. Her father's chair held her the way he always had, steady, without needing a single word,